One guy's been manipulating people that way his entire career. Did you ever read the Robert Kennedy book?
No, it's on my list, but I have not.
Holy shit.
Pretty good. I need to read that. So these days, I read for people coming on the podcast. I've read every book for people that have come on thus far. I don't know if I'll always be able to. But I think some of those books would have fallen to lower on the priority list if they weren't coming on the podcast. But some of those conversations that I've had in the books I've read have made it into the pages of the novel. So there's all this overlap to include this one. Brian Mora has a book called The Able Archers, and it talks about a nuclear exchange that almost happened between the United States and the Soviet Union in 1983. And there was one guy in the Soviet Union, an officer on watch that night who was not supposed to be there. The guy who was supposed to be there got sick. So this one guy steps up, goes in for the person who's sick, and he's the one guy who studied the United States, and he's an intellectual, and he's put in this time and effort into understanding the strategic kind of aspects of this conflict in the Cold War. And there's a launch from the United States, ICBMs, heading towards the Soviet Union. That's what shows up on their screen. And what he's supposed to do is launch back. And he has pressure from above to launch. It's the protocol, and he doesn't, because he's like, this isn't right. And it was a glitch in their system that showed.
Christ.
Yeah, and there's all these other things at play too. Korean Airlines flight 007 that was shot down earlier. There's all these things happening that would lend themselves
heightened
to
tensions.
Exactly. So and those documents were just, I think it was, I might be off by a year or two, but I think it was 1999 when these documents were finally declassified. So well after the end of the Cold War, and but. Things like that. So I read that book and had that conversation with this guy, and he's a really nice guy, great guy, been in the intelligence world his whole career, and that made it into the pages of this novel. So there's overlap, but Robert Kennedy has not been on the podcast yet, so I have not read that book, but I've been meaning to read it. It sounds fascinating.
He was just on Russell Brand's podcast, and he talked about his uncle and his father's assassination. Holy shit. His recall is amazing. His ability to just remember all these different pieces that were in play, particularly with the JFK assassination and Lee Harvey Oswald, and the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset and that he had defected to Russia, but it was a fake defection, and that all the different pieces that were in place that you could point to. There's so much evidence. He's like, if we went into this, he said to Russell that if we just wanted to cover the evidence that the CIA killed JFK, he goes, this would be a 10-hour podcast.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and it makes it. You haven't gotten to the stage in the book yet, but I don't want to give too much away.
Don't give it away.
Yeah, no. But you'll like when you get to the certain part, you'll be like, no way, because I think nobody is going to expect this part of the book to go the way it does. But point being, it takes us back to that assassination, and so crazy. Early 90s, remember, I mean, you had Oliver North on here, which is Oliver North's book's fascinating. But you have Congress mandating law that the United States has to declassify these documents by a certain date.
Yep.
And 2 administrations, after a visit from the CIA, neglect to do that, or they let some things out, but not everything, like is mandated by law all these years after. So if they're not involved, and they might not be, but they're certainly going well out of their way to make themselves look guilty.
Yeah.
Like really trying hard to make themselves look guilty.
But I feel like them making themselves look guilty is safer than removing all doubt.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, because we're not talking about, I mean, Tucker talked about it on his television show, and he boldly claimed that the CIA, killed Ken. But it was a weird way he did it. Like he said, someone told me, and he doesn't release that person's name. It's like, the way Robert Kennedy Jr. talks about it on Russell Brand's podcast, it's like
I'm gonna listen to that.
Depth.
Yeah.
And it's just this holy shit.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, in most of my books, I make mention, and this one in particular, go back to the Church hearings and the Pike hearings of the 70s that exposed some overreach by agencies in the federal government, particularly the CIA. But as it pertains to the Kennedy assassination, it is so strange. All these years later, they still walk into the Oval Office and have a private conversation and walk out, and all of a sudden these documents that are mandated to be released by law are not.
Yeah.
Like so odd. But in this one also, so a friend of mine married into the Kennedy family, so I went back to Hyannisport, got to meet Robert Kennedy, and I spent some time with Ethel Kennedy, and it was amazing. And that experience also informs. I think you've gotten to that chapter already, where he goes to meet the old woman, and so that part inspired this book right here. And that was really cool to be back there and see. Look at this chair. And in this chair, there's a little table next to it, and you see a picture of JFK watching the election results come in. And you look at the picture, and you look at the chair, and it's him in that chair right there. It's amazing. It was really interesting to be in that that part of the world, in that place, with that family. But yeah, it inspired this.
Old history.
Yeah. Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
But it inspired this, and I mean, who knows if we'll ever get to the bottom of that assassination? And it wasn't that long ago. Like when we were born, we thought it was a long time ago. Like let's say 1983 or something. 63 is a long time ago when you're a kid. But now looking back, everything's relative. It's that time-space continuum thing, whatever that is. That's a real deal. Time speeding up as you get older. And
Sure.
It's. I saw a meme the other day, and it said if Marty McFly went back in time today, he'd be going back to 1993 or something like that.
Jesus.
Yeah, I know.
Well, how about World War I was 100 years ago?
Crazy. Well, yeah, a little over, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's
essentially 100 years.
That's nothing.
Yeah.
That's nothing. World War II, less.
Yeah.
Vietnam, much less.
Yeah.
Korea, less.
Yep. And Donnie Edwards, who has the Best Defense Foundation, he has a picture of himself with a World War I veteran, which is pretty cool. And so my daughter, who's 17, we went to Pearl Harbor and took 62 veterans back to Pearl Harbor for the 80th anniversary commemoration event about a year and a half ago. Last June, we went to Normandy. So she's on Normandy with somebody who is the first out of his landing craft storming the beach. And she's there on this beach with him. And he's 100 years old right now, hearing that story from him. And I'm getting pictures of them talking together. And so one day she'll say, I have a picture with a World War II veteran.
What percentage of guys died on that beach?